Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about aligning ITSM with DevOps. And some of you might be wondering why we're actually going to be talking about this. So I have two amazing guests with me, Kevin and Eileen, and I'll let them both introduce themselves when they come on. But a lot of people, I think, and Eileen definitely will be jumping into this a little more, think of these things as being in opposition, that ITSM and ITIL and a lot of the processes that we've built up over time are actually in opposition to doing things the DevOps way. But that's not actually true, and hopefully we'll explain this to you throughout the course of today. One thing I wanted to mention is, and I should have said this before, is there's a Q&A box in the side of your screen. Please ask questions throughout this, and we'll get to them either through the presentation or by the end. We're also going to be having two speakers and then a demo followed at the end. So for those of you who see the media player box, it should be on your right-hand side. When we get to the demo, you can expand that to see what the actual demo that Kevin's going to be going through. So one of the things we've noticed in observing ITSM and helping enterprises modernize a lot of their processes is that specific implementations and the bureaucracy and process around those things often inhibit modernizing your IT capabilities. And without stealing her thunder too much, I'd like to introduce you next to Eileen, who's going to jump into this topic.
Thanks, Nigel. Hi, everybody. I'm Eileen. I work for WM Promise, and we're a Puppet partner. We started in business about 12 years ago, and the area we started in was IT service management, ITOM, that space. We've moved into the DevOps space, so I've got some very firm opinions about how the two of them relate to each other. So the first thing is, given that we're talking about integrating DevOps and ITSM, we really couldn't continue without talking about ITIL. So for me, about 5 years ago, I kept hearing that DevOps is going to replace ITIL. ITIL's dead, DevOps has arrived, ITSM and DevOps are competing against each other and so on. But it really doesn't make sense to think like that. So what I want to do is to just start off with what they each are and what the goal of each is. Especially now that the overall goal of IT is not just about supporting the business, but actually differentiating it. So all of these things, ITSM, ITIL, and DevOps, they're not the same, but they are certainly related. Okay, so let's look at ITSM first. So for a lot of people in the organization, it's a service desk tool. That's what lots of people think ITSM is. But that's not what it is, okay? So it's actually about how teams manage the delivery of IT services to whomever the end consumer is, whether that's an external customer or an employee within the organization. And what that encompasses is all of the practices, all of the activities that go around designing, creating, delivering, and supporting those IT services. So we're actually hitting on the core concept of ITSM, which is that IT should be delivered as a service. So although it's being delivered and enabled by IT, it's the service bit we're focusing on and not the technology. Okay, so it's not about the IT bit, it's about the service. So really the goal of IT service management is to make sure that the right people, the technologies, the processes, everything's in place so that the organization can meet its business goals. So let's talk about like something standard, a standard sort of service delivery we could all imagine. So a typical scenario is where somebody needs, let's say, a new piece of hardware like a laptop. So it might be that in your organization, you telephone a service desk and you submit your request that way. They ask for details about you and what you need. Or it could be that you're with a more sophisticated organization and you've got a self-service portal. You log onto the self-service portal and you submit your request that way. You fill out some sort of ticket with the relevant information, and that then kicks off a workflow. The ticket then lands with your IT team, and they have some sort of queue where they sort and address the incoming requests or issues based on their importance. Now, if you think about it, the resourcing to fulfill that request, all the communications with the requester, letting them know when what they've asked for can be met, knowing where the requester is located so the laptop can actually be delivered to them, the provisioning of the laptop, being able to track it, being able to report on the request, all of that is part of the service, right? So that's all managing the entire service. And with anything you want to do, you would like to know the best way to do that, how best to prioritize stuff that needs done, how best to align your resources to the variety of services you offer and so on. So you do require some sort of structure around that, and ideally some guidance, some sort of steer as to what's the best way to go about things. And that's what ITIL is. So that's what ITIL is. ITIL is actually a framework around how best to manage IT services, and not just that, but about how to go about improving them. And that's where we'll lead on to DevOps. Now, ITIL is the most widely accepted approach to ITSM. It has been around since the 80s, so it's probably part of the reason, because it's around so long, as the people think, oh, for God's sake, it must be dead at this stage. But the whole point is it's been evolving over the decades. It's changed. We're now on to ITIL version 4 is the latest iteration. And there has been a real shift there in terms of embracing new concepts such as DevOps. And one of the things you'll notice is I use the word practice as distinct from process, as this is one of the terms we're now seeing more used in ITIL version 4. But key to thinking about ITIL and ITSM is, if you don't have some form of standardization, or if you don't have some kind of agreed way to doing things, you will most definitely waste time and effort. Okay, that is a given. So this takes us on to DevOps. So what's DevOps about? So DevOps is really about, well, one of the key things about DevOps is about collaboration. You're trying to get your development and IT operations teams to collaborate. The reason you want them to do this is that you'd like to have your build, test, release software cycle. You'd like it to be faster. You'd also like to be more reliable because you've got more collaboration and communication. You'd like to be able to solve issues more quickly. You'd like to better manage unplanned work. And all of those, none of those stands against what you're trying to do as an IT service manager. None of it stands in contradiction to what ITIL says you should do. So, you know, it really is time to move beyond the whole conversation about its ITSM versus DevOps. You know, it really is time to see that there's elements of both, whether you explicitly follow an ITIL framework or not. It's just time to see the merits in both, and it's definitely time to see that DevOps is certainly more than just automated development and deployment. And you know, the fact that it promotes this culture of collaboration and a blame-free culture, there's so much in that ITIL has learned and embraced with ITIL version 4. Likewise, you know, ITIL and ITSM, it shouldn't be pigeonholed as an administrative burden, but actually there's an opportunity to use it in an agile way to fit the needs of whatever your organization is. So there's definitely crossover between the two of these, especially in the area of collaboration. So that's just a brief sort of recap of what the three areas are: ITSM, ITIL, and DevOps. What's what, essentially. Now, what I want to talk about, and Nigel, would you move to my next slide, is what's not. So these are just some of the common myths that everybody, you know, rabbits on about ITIL, and specifically, they're very much not true when we're looking at ITIL version 4. So let's hit with the first one. And Nigel, actually, you brought this up in your slide, where you were saying, you know, you'll often see big organizations that they've got ITSM running and they've got issues. So it's certainly true. Loads of organizations have implemented ITIL and they're facing lots of challenges now. I'm not disagreeing with that. They can have issues due to unnecessary bureaucracy. They may have inflexible and complex processes. They might be using outdated tools or technology. They may have siloed IT departments. You know, they could have lots of other dysfunctions going on. But also, what I would say is, you know, there's lots of organizations who are making a mess of Agile. You know, especially if their interpretation of Agile is it's a sort of a shoot from the hip approach. So here at Promise, we've often conducted health checks for organizations that have rolled out, you know, it might be an ITSM tool, it might be that they've got an ITIL program running, it might be that they've rolled out DevOps tools, and they just can't see where it's all gone wrong because they sort of thought there was going to be this massive transformation internally, and it hasn't happened. So just because somebody implements Agile or DevOps or ITIL poorly, it shouldn't be an indictment of those concepts or frameworks. It just may mean they've gone about things in the wrong way. So the first myth is, you know, ITIL is not prescriptive. You know, ITIL was never supposed to be a one-size-fits-all solution where every single organization was meant to implement it in the same way. You know, and one of ITIL's themes is to adopt and adapt. It actually encourages you to have a flexible approach to how you implement the framework. The other thing is, it's not a goal in itself. So, you know, I'm well aware of, through working for years with Promise and other consultancies, is that you'll often see in an organization they'll decide to embrace a new service desk tool, and this is where it kickstarts conversations about ITIL. You know, is the tool ITIL aligned? Does the tool support ITIL processes or practices as they're now known? Well, ITIL, as we've said, it's not just about the tool or the technology. It's not just about the practices, and it's most certainly not the goal. Improvement is the goal. That's what, and likewise with DevOps, improvement is the goal. Doing things better, doing things more efficiently, not wasting time. They're the goals. ITIL and DevOps are a way to get you there. So once you roll out your new service desk tool, or once you've sent your management team on their ITIL training, or once you've sent them on their agile project management, or you've sent them on a Puppet course, that's not the moment where you roll up, you rub your hands together and go, fantastic, we've now done that job. That's just part of the route of getting to your end goal, which is improvement. Okay, the next one is definitely one that I see all the time. ITIL isn't what we need. ITIL only suits big organizations. In fact, I've heard that of DevOps too. Oh, no, we can't afford that. We can't do that. That's not what we do. We're a very small organization. So what I would say to people, first of all, is it's not that they are too big, too complex, too arduous for your business. These are the things that stop you having to face adversity. These are the things that help you to overcome complex issues and so on. And if you try and approach any of these with a sort of a big bang, try and approach it all to get everything done in one go, you will fail. I think that's what I've seen happen in the past. Really, things need to be approached and sort of tackling them with small bites. So whether you approach ITIL, DevOps, any of these, what you need to start looking at is what are your own problems and issues, and then look to ITIL and DevOps and say, well, how can I use these frameworks? How can I use this way of thinking, or how can I use this culture to address and improve the problems and issues that I'm facing? And once you get some of the fundamentals in place, you can then sort of use ITIL or whatever it is in a more sophisticated way to say, evolve your service offerings. Look, I'll give you a really basic example is, the use within ITIL of a priority matrix in incident management, so that you can focus your resources, you can focus your technical effort where it's most needed. Now, that's something that a small organization desperately needs. If you've got a small number of resources and you're a small organization, being able to prioritize work is key to being able to stay in business. And another very common thing is, a lack of clarity about whose role is who, whose role is what. That's the thing that ITIL is great at pointing you towards, trying to work out what roles there are involved in delivering services and who should be doing those. Now, in a small organization, it's very common that one person will wear several hats. They'll take on several roles. But there does need to be clarity around, whose role it is and who's responsible. So regardless of the size of an organization, there is space for you. There is something in ITIL for you. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, ITIL doesn't work in an agile environment. Now, listen, contrary to popular belief, ITIL does not conflict with agile or DevOps thinking, right? It's not limited to infrastructure or operations. ITIL focuses on value and improvement, on services, end-to-end services. It includes management of applications, of development, of operations, infrastructure. It's about aligning with the business strategy and customer value. If anything, if you look through, it's actually very agnostic on the topic of how to conduct application development. It doesn't have a bias for waterfall approach to project management. So, it accommodates Agile as well as any other possible approach to running a project in your IT department. So as I've said with the first myth is, it's non-prescriptive, and it's pretty much so, not just in terms of how your practices or processes are done, but also in terms of tools or organizational structure and so on. Now, the next classic myth, ITIL is outdated in the DevOps world. So many of the best practices we're looking at and described in ITIL version 4, although they may not be identical, they're very much advocated in Agile and DevOps. So, for example, what you'll see is the concept of collaboration. This is a really big one, and I am going to talk in a few moments about specifically what we're seeing in ITIL 4 that aligns with DevOps. But collaboration is a key one, And so let's choose somewhere big that everybody knows. Google. So DevOps at Google is a blend of agile methodologies. They incorporate ITIL best practices. They've got systemic problem solving and decision making in there. They've got a very mature culture of blame-free, continuous improvement and so on. So what they do is they take a framework. They take a new cultural way of approaching development and operations teams working closely together. So they basically blend and integrate, holistic approach to people, processes, technology, and which is what ITIL has essentially been advocating since the 80s, since the onset of their first publications. So, no more than saying DevOps and Agile don't equate to a sort of a sloppy Wild West approach. This is absolutely true. And equally, what we would say is discipline and structure are actually needed within an ITIL and a DevOps world. These are something that any organization is going to require. So I want to speak, so those are just general myths about ITIL, but let's talk about ITIL version 4, the latest iteration, which came out last year, in more detail. So Nadia, can you just put on the next slide, please? Okay, now definitely today we wouldn't have time to go through all of ITIL 4. As you know, Axelis, who publish ITIL 4, they produce a huge series of books and blogs and white papers every time they do an iteration of their framework. So although we wouldn't have time to go through all of it, I do want to speak about some of the elements where I can see a really obvious and clear connection with DevOps. Right. One of the big changes with ITIL version 4 is the focus on value. So where value is, it's more than a desired outcome. It's something that they're saying needs to be co-created by all involved. Right. So that ideology or that way of thinking, that really, it fuels the breaking down of silos. And that's something that is key to the DevOps culture, is this concept of not having people pigeonholed into certain areas, but lots of collaboration and cross communication to ensure that the best outcome is served to the business by everybody working together. So as the service value system, which is a key component of ITIL version 4, what it talks about is interfacing with other organizations. It talks about forming an ecosystem where you can create value for all of those within the ecosystem. And I think this is really clear how that way of thinking aligns with the sort of the DevOps culture. In ITIL version 4, what we've seen is, I've written here, you can see I've called it change enablement, because this is a new term that they're using with ITIL version 4 instead of change management. Now, to be honest, I think it's because change management has become a sort of a dirty word to be bandied about. I mean, if, strictly speaking, change management is about, efficiently and promptly handling any changes you want to make within the organization around things like IT infrastructure, or, rolling out a new service, or, resolving problems in the code and so on. To be effective change management is providing context, providing transparency, getting rid of bottlenecks, and key, minimizing risk. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that as people realize that any change in a big organization may impact critical IT services, what we saw that there was a very long process perhaps introduced, and all changes used to fall under a weekly CAB review. Now, I've been part of that. God help us, we've all sat in a room where somebody comes in with a folder larger than a War and Peace in big print, and we've slowly gone through all the changes that are meant to go through in the next week. And that's about, managing change-related risk, which is fine. That's an IT fundamental, do no harm to the business. But somewhere along the way, every single change had to get reviewed. And really doing that, it's just so difficult to support the rate of change that's required by businesses today, that, you just don't have the time to waste on bureaucracy and delays. The rate of change that the business required, a lot of change management processes just weren't supporting that. But in reality, there is no need for you to have that sort of structure where you have a CAB meeting and every single change needs to be formally reviewed. Many of us are aware that you'll be in an organization where there's different types of changes, emergency change, standard change, normal change. And the standard changes are the ones that don't require huge review. They're the ones that are repeatable. They're the ones that have been done, they're often called routine changes. So they tend to be the pre-authorized changes that would be considered having little or no risk associated with them. So what you actually want is that the changes that are occurring within your organization, you want as many of them as possible to follow that type of model. What you'd like to think is that there's virtually no risk associated to as many changes as you can push through each week. And one of the things I'm seeing is that our clients and public clients that have embraced DevOps cultures, what they're doing is they're getting rid of the risk up front by automating so much of what needs to be done. And by doing that, you're reducing, you're mitigating the risk. You're reducing the CAB or whatever sort of change management process you have in place. You're reducing that becoming the bottleneck, and you're relieving the burden on so many of your technical staff and your management staff who have to attend CAB meetings and review and check what the relationship between the various elements involved in the change and what the impact on those will be. So the next one, continual improvement. Okay, so again, I'm using this phrase continual improvement. So it was known as continual service improvement with version 3, and it was one of the five ITIL version 3 books. So they've updated the model slightly, not just sort of with the term, but they've also got a sort of a take action section to it. And the reason they're sort of doing this is it's very much around the improvement of services and what's the next step you need to take. Now, to me, one of the next steps that you really need to be taking is, what can I automate? In my service offerings, where can I automate stuff, be it with DevOps or be it with other automation technologies that are out there? What do I have people doing that they no longer need to do? And I'm going to touch on automation again as I go through more of the links with DevOps. The next one is ITAM, IT asset management. So again, when Promus started up about 12 years ago, this was one of the key areas we worked in. We worked in service management, configuration, traditional configuration management, and ITAM. So ITAM's really about knowing, what your assets are, what you've deployed, what you need to maintain, what you've got service contracts running against them, and the financial aspects of that. So what the depreciation levels are around those, when they should be disposed of, what they look at like at the moment. So it's really making sure that the valuable items, the tangible, the intangible, can be tracked and that you can use them. Now, I can tell you from years of experience, if you want to know the truth of what you have got to rely on technology to do this. The concept of people actually and this is definitely an area where I will see silos. You will see the network team have got one picture of what they have. You might find your applications team have another picture of what they have. You might find that your desktop team have another picture of what they have, and so on. You really need to work towards having one source of the truth and technology that will provide you that one source of the truth. DevOps. DevOps will absolutely rewrite your world in this sphere. Collaboration. I've already touched on this when I've talked about ITIL versions 4 focus on value. So, in that whole concept of co-creating value, it really is about collaboration. There's very much a shift to focus more on the customer experience, about how they feel about achieving value, and establishing sort of a foundation of, moving from traditional process-led, delivery to a practice approach where you're working collaboratively within the organization. So within DevOps, within with comms, with HR, with whomever it is, in terms of overall service delivery. Now, personally for me, one of my favorite parts of ITIL has always been its guiding principles. Okay, so in ITIL version 4, the guiding principles, they're recommendations that guide an organization in any circumstances they may face with regard to ITSM. To me, it's the practical bit. It's the ITIL version 4 that's very much practical, and it's also the principles of it that really clearly align with DevOps. Now, two of them I'm going to pick out are progress iteratively. That is definitely a concept that ITIL version 4 is embracing from Agile and DevOps. Okay, it's the fact that ITIL is now saying you need to adopt an iterative approach to delivering your services, and also optimizing and automating. So you can see the quote. I've specifically said what it is that ITIL version 4 expects us to do in terms of automation. Eliminate anything that's truly wasteful and use technology to achieve whatever it's capable of. Human intervention should only happen where it really contributes value. Now, I'm really looking forward to Kevin's demo, but before I move on to it, I can immediately think of key areas. So one of the things is in our own organization. Here, we've got a SaaS service portal. It's the obvious stuff. I'd like a new monitor on my desk. If I want my laptops needs replacing, I will raise a request for a new laptop. But because we've got a large engineering team, you start to think, well, why is it that I only can ask for things like a new laptop or a new monitor or a password reset? Why can't I ask for an IIS server to be stood up? Why can't I ask for deployment of an application? Why can't I ask for stuff like that on my self-service portal? Things that you rarely see in a request catalog. It's rarely an offering you see displayed in a self-service portal. But why is that? Why is that when now we have DevOps tools that will automate the fulfillment of those tasks? Nobody thinks for a second about the fact that password resets are done by orchestration tools. Everybody accepts that. Nobody assumes for a moment that the people who are running IT services have to understand the detail of those password reset optimization orchestration tools. Likewise, you don't have to understand the DevOps technology to be fully ready to embrace the fact that it will do a lot of the fulfillment of requests that should be on a self-service portal for you. Okay, now before I steal Kevin's thunder, I'm going to pass over to him so he can show you some of the things I've talked about. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Eileen. And if you have any questions for Eileen, please post them in the Q&A button below so that we can get to them after the remainder of the slides and the demo. So my name is Kevin Reewijk. I'm a senior principal sales engineer for Puppet. I've lived in IT infrastructure pretty much all my corporate life. What I'd like to talk about is how we are taking this one step further with ready to use integrations with ServiceNow. Because this kind of started about a year ago, where I saw a really inspiring YouTube video from Eric Ledyard, who is currently a product manager at ServiceNow. And he talked about a former project of his where he tried to implement DevOps at one of the oldest banks in the world. And that project failed because that bank was a textbook example of customers that were implementing ITIL processes primarily for risk avoidance. And so everything was about the process and not about the result. And that's something that I've seen in previous customers that I work with and that I work for that are currently Puppet customers. And it dawned on me that if customers are adopting DevOps, and I came to work for a DevOps company because I believe in it, they need to be able to harmonize that with ITIL processes to get any benefit. Otherwise, only a very, very small fraction of the entire process will be optimized, and there's very little value for the company. So this is why we worked on an integration with ServiceNow. My primary driver here is change management, and this sparked all the other integrations that we now have available in ServiceNow to complete the entire picture. So ServiceNow, you probably already know, it is one of the leading IT service management and IT operations management platform in the market, and one of the first all-cloud platform as a service solutions in this space. So a lot of our customers, I think about 80% of the Fortune 500 uses this, so it is the primary platform that we look at. Next slide, Nigel. And good ITSM platforms give you a shared data model, which then replace a lot of individual tools, spreadsheets, ad hoc databases, email processes. Everyone can work from a single source of truth, and every process can be governed by a single tool. So this is a great foundation for your ITIL processes. The question is then, how do you integrate this with your DevOps processes? Next slide. So the core ITSM offering of ServiceNow is made up of these 5 components. It's a CMDB, of course, to track all your IT assets. So request management to enable self-service via Service Catalog. It's change management to document and approve planned changes. Incident management to document and track service disruptions. Problem management to track down issues. So these processes that all stem from ITIL are really closely related to activities that Puppet actually performs in your infrastructure. So a way to look at this is where Puppet takes action to execute a change. The process around it, from definition to approval, is typically governed by ServiceNow. Next slide. Therefore, we can think of ServiceNow and Puppet as opposite sides of the same coin. The vast majority of Puppet customers have ServiceNow in place, mostly working in parallel. I had 1 or 2 customers that did their own integrations to connect this together. One of them called it the DevOps data center, and it was truly inspiring to see how they integrated both and got value to the business. So, but it also means that some information is duplicated across both platforms, and some level of manual effort is involved to get information from one platform to the other. So over time, several customers have built their own integrations to make this more efficient. but more like generally, Puppet-supported integrations have been a long-standing desire from our customers. Next slide. I'm happy to announce that the wait is finally over. So we've been working really hard the last year to connect ServiceNow and Puppet in several different ways, making it easier to share data between both platforms, really bringing DevOps and ITIL together. We work with our customers to determine the specific areas where bidirectional data sharing is needed and develop integrations that cater to those needs. Next slide. So we're going to look at 3 brand new integrations that we have available today. And I will briefly talk about a 4th one that we plan to deliver in the future. So available now are an integration that allows you to use ServiceNow as a self-service front end for controlling Puppet automation. Also an integration that connects planned Puppet changes to the ITIL change management process in ServiceNow. That's the one that I'm really passionate about. And then an integration that sends change events to ServiceNow for correlation and analysis so that you can generate incidents when needed and correlate everything together. And then planned for later is an integration to update ServiceNow CMDB data with the information from Puppet. Well, we'll get back to that in the end. Next slide. So there's a very good reason for why you would want an integration like this around self-service. Because not everybody in the company knows how to use Puppet to automate changes. There's probably a fairly limited amount of people in your company today that directly work with Puppet. Others would likely benefit from using Puppet as well, but expecting everyone to get properly trained to do so is basically unrealistic. So we need to make it far easier to leverage Puppet, which is exactly what this integration does. Next slide. So in a nutshell, the integration allows you to use ServiceNow as a friendly user interface to control either all or parts of Puppet automation. For the most user-friendly experience, you can create custom fields on your CMDB table for anything that you'd like to give your users control over. For example, adding additional software packages that can be installed at will, or modifying OS kernel settings, or tuning application parameters. Things that typically the knowledge lies in the business, but they don't have the direct capability to manage their own systems and applications that way. And then having this data in ServiceNow through the integration, it can be easily acted upon inside of your Puppet automation. Now you can either allow direct changes to those fields, as I will show in the demo, or you can make those fields read-only and then use ServiceNow actions to provide a set of well-defined options that they can modify via the service catalog and then connect the rest of the workflow against that. Next slide. The second integration, and I'll do a complete demo after all of them, is enriched change management. So for most of our customers, Puppet is their primary change execution platform. They may approve it somewhere else, but it's Puppet that actually execute those changes. And for many of those customers, ServiceNow is their primary change registration and approval platform. Naturally, this should be one interconnected solution. And that's exactly what this integration provides. This one is all about the handoffs between one platform to the other and vice versa. Next slide. So when you propose a Puppet code change to make a change in your infrastructure, this integration automatically generates a ServiceNow change request from the Puppet impact analysis report. And once the change request has been approved inside of ServiceNow and it reaches the implement stage, the integration lets ServiceNow orchestrate the promotion of the change into production. This integration eliminates a number of manual steps in the change process, enabling greater efficiency, improved change documentation, and faster cycle times. Next slide. And then the third one, this is automated incident registration. And while the previous integrations deal with planned changes, this integration is for compliance drift corrections, so changes that were made to bring a system back to the correct configuration after it drifted out of compliance or someone made an unauthorized change. And since there is no way to know when this happens, the The standard ITIL change management process is not suited for this scenario. Instead, this should be documented as an event, and an incident should be created if the circumstances warrant it. And this is definitely something that is much better left for robots to do instead of humans. Next slide. And so with this integration, Puppet forwards summary data of Puppet run reports to ServiceNow event management ideally. And this can be done in the form of basic incidents when a corrective change occurs, we just create an incident directly. Or again, and this is the better one, you can send the information as events. In the latter case, you can create your own event rules to correlate events and create consolidated incidents when certain thresholds are crossed. So when, for example, on a large amount of systems, you see the same correction happening, you can create one incident from those. Next slide. And then the one that we will work on hopefully next year is up-to-date asset management. And so this is where, for a lot of companies, there's a big struggle in maintaining the CMDB to keep the information up to date. Outdated CMDBs have been a problem for many organizations and have given rise to discovery and inventory tools like ServiceNow Discovery, for example. However, such tools often run agentlessly and are known to cause a performance impact or stability problems on the systems they interrogate. As a result, customers really don't like running these tools all the time. By contrast, Puppet already knows everything it manages knows everything about the systems that it manages and stores that information in its own database. So updating the CMDB in ServiceNow from the Puppet database would be a lot more efficient compared to using agentless discovery tools for that. Next slide. And so Puppet automatically collects information about the systems it manages as part of the normal enforcement runs. So things like software inventory, standard facts about hardware and the operating system, custom facts that you can create yourself. This integration will allow you to select which data you would like to send to ServiceNow for updating existing items in your CMDB. And this reduces the scope for something like ServiceNow Discovery to just finding new or rogue systems on the network, while anything that you are already managing can be updated automatically through Puppet. So let me switch to sharing my screen. You will see this show up in the video player, so please make sure you enlarge the video player to see that. I'll mute my video for the best results. And again, if you have questions, please note them in the Q&A. And you should be able to see my Puppet Enterprise screen here. So I have a demo environment. I'm managing a couple of systems here, and we'll be focusing on this demo Nix 0 and demo Win 0 machines, which are two, like a Linux and a Windows machine in my production environment. And here we can see that if we quickly do a logon back to our ServiceNow environment, that we have those systems here in ServiceNow as well. And I've added here an integration that allows us to bring the data from ServiceNow into Puppet. And I've added a couple of fields to give me some things that I can do. So here we've added a Puppet environment and a Puppet classes field, all in a Puppet automation tab that shows up on a CMDB item, which allow me to directly control the environment that these machines live in and any functionality, like the server role that this should get. So we can see here we've set this as a sample website role, and we can see that this Demonix 0 machine actually is running a web server right here, just as we set up here. We can also see that I've added an additional field called enforced packages. This is like an example of being able to add any custom field that I want and use that inside my Puppet automation, where I can add additional packages that I want to use. So for example, if I want to say, I would like to add this application and maybe I don't want to see this application here, I can just do that through the comfort of ServiceNow, have a nice user interface for this. Or again, if you don't allow direct editing of the CMDB record, you can create some actions in ServiceNow and publish them through the self-service portal. And then inside of Puppet, if the next time Puppet runs, it will see that information coming from ServiceNow we actually store that data inside of the facts. So the facts field, we expand the trusted fields to have additional data that is coming from ServiceNow, which will include any of those fields that we added. So that when Puppet runs, it can now see those changes in the data that we provided, and we can use that in our Puppet code to automate the things that we would like some self-service for the user. So here we can see that we've now indeed removed the nano package and added the redis package. So a really quick way to give some self-service for the user to have like combinations of a role that the machine has and maybe some additional software packages that they want to be able to quickly set up. That's a quick example of being able to use the CMDB integration or the self-service integration. Another one is, okay, what do I do if I want to make a change? So I made a change to my Puppet code a little before this demo, where I changed the web server port of this web server role that machine is running from 8080, on which it is currently running, as we can see here, to port 80. And this is basically only a 2-character change in my Puppet code, but this could have effects on multiple layers. And Puppet has a nice tool called Continuous Delivery for Puppet Enterprise that can analyze those changes and integrate with ServiceNow. So our impact analysis here shows that there will be 11 changes as a result of this port change. So we can see that we're changing where the web server listens, we're changing the vhost, we're changing the firewall rules. It's on multiple places. And so we want all this richness of information to be available inside of ServiceNow. And that is what this integration does. So we can point this to ServiceNow, and then inside of ServiceNow, if I take a look at the change requests, I can see there's an open change here where it is grabbing that same information of what we're changing. It is already assigning it to the change management group. It is indexed priority, risk, and impact, and it shows me a link to that impact analysis and a human readable summary of what we're changing here. And because there is more than 10 changes, which is the default, we say, well, probably someone should take a look at this change just to make sure. And then we'll see that this affects that one machine that impact analysis already sees is affected by this particular code change and is ready for approval. So since I'm an admin in this system, I can approve it directly. So I'll do that. Is 2 steps here. So now there's the cap approval. So we'll do that as well. This is a nice way of facilitating the process with IT automation. We can now schedule this change to happen somewhere in the future, or let's not wait for it, implement it right now. And this triggers another workflow where we kick off a business rule that automatically interacts back with the Puppet environment and approves this promotion. So we can see there's now new events, and we are automatically, ServiceNow is interacting here to push this through to production and to also automatically approve the deployments here in CD4PE. So that we can say that only ServiceNow can approve this, for example, and have this additional layer of security where you have to follow the process to get a change into production. So we will wait a few moments for that to happen. And then when we rerun Puppet on this machine, we will expect that this will show some changes where it is updating the web, the port and rerunning the website. So now it runs on port 80. So we'll give it a couple of seconds to do so. And we can see back here that all of the deployments also to our production environment where the Puppet master list is now completed, and that our change now ticket in ServiceNow has all of this data. So everything that happened, this change was executed successfully, and we can now close this ticket. So it is set for review. It is set with a status code of success, and we can simply click close to close the change. And that takes care of the entire ITIL process. So a really streamlined process. And we can now see that we have indeed updated our web server. It's now running on port 80. So if I go back to my website, we can see that it no longer runs here, but it does run on port 80. And that's a nice way of facilitating the ITIL process and the DevOps process with the combination of the tools. Then lastly, if we look at incident management, if we have events where there are changes that are corrective, so machines drift out of deployment and need to be corrected, that's something that we want to see in a different way in ServiceNow. So what I've done in the background is I've stopped the Puppet servers on a couple of machines, and I've now rerunning Puppet on those machines so that it will identify corrective changes. And let's see. We have them here, almost. There we are. So I've made some corrective changes on these machines, and both machines have now been corrected. But this kind of information, especially what happens, so in this case, the Puppet service was stopped and it was restarted again by Puppet itself. That should show up as relevant information inside of ServiceNow. And so with the incident integration, you can now forward that kind of information to ServiceNow. So you can see here that we received the events, that we had these corrective changes, and this information that the Puppet service was changed from stopped to running. And this happened on 2 machines. And the nice thing is that inside of ServiceNow Event Management, you can actually then create rules for that, so that when you see that sort of stuff happening, you can correlate those events together. And so here, that is actually already happened. If I zoom this out a little bit, we can see that for these corrective changes, a single alert was created. We can also see it here in the alerts pane. And so we now have a single alert that shows that on more than one machine, in this case it triggers at 2, but you can configure that, we saw this particular change. And so we can see here that there are 2 events from these 2 machines that are tied to it. And then from there, we can say, okay, we can automatically create an incident, or we can at least have a look at this alert and then create an incident when we want to or not, depending on what the process is within the company. So this is a great way of giving that rich information into ServiceNow in a way that you can leverage it to bring it into your ITIL management processes. All right, that's what I had to show.
Thank you. So hopefully you all understood from, Eileen's amazing overview of why ITSM is actually really aligned with DevOps and the sort of benefits that you'll get from adopting a more flexible, principle-driven approach. So we unfortunately run a little bit out of questions, but you can see Eileen and you can reach me at nigel.k@puppet.com, WM Promise being one of our favorite, not that we like to play favorite, service delivery partners. Always happy to help out with advisor and implementation services, modernizing your ITSM practices, implementing ServiceNow integrations, education, any of these things. Please reach out to us.